Today is a special Sunday. It's our first ever Elder Spirits Sunday. Now, what is Elder Spirits? Some of you may be asking. I'm going to ask Jim to give us a brief history of how this group came about and who its target audience is, perhaps.
Elder Spirits is a very informal group. It started just before COVID, as I recall, because some of us who'd been here a long time and were retirement age or thereabouts realized we had a lot in common with the others who were like us in the congregation. And so we designated a table at the rear of the sanctuary on Sundays as a place where we would gather and talk to each other. And out of that came some projects. For instance, we did a postcarding event where all the bunch of us got together to help with the 2022 postcarding elections. And we came up with the name Elder Spirits because we felt like the point was to talk about what we were doing spiritually or thinking about spiritually as older people, because it's a distinct phase of life.
Is there a minimum age requirement? Like, do you need to be subscribed to AARP, for example? Or what's the threshold here? Similar to how we have a definition for young adults, right? Even with our liberal UU standards, that's the cutoff age of 35. So what is the, how do you define being an elder?
I think each individual defines it for themselves. You know, there's a moment when you realize, oh, I didn't actually think I'd get here, but I am here. And it can be hard. When you get the first mailing from AARP just before your 50th birthday, it's a real shock. Like, oops, somebody thinks I'm entering a new phase of life.
Right. Well, thank you, Jim. And I also want to acknowledge the other members of this panel. We have Arnie Weintraub and Melanie Lee and Catherine Nordside and also John Bush. So welcome to this panel. And I know we're missing a chair. I should probably put a chair out here for Bob Jones, who unfortunately has been ill, but is nonetheless a very crucial part of this group. So we acknowledge his presence here, if not in body, but in spirit. And thank you, Allison Ben David, for coming up with a card, a Get Well Soon card that you all are invited to sign. From what I understand, it's a huge card. So there's room for you all to send Bob your good thoughts after the service. There it is in the back table. Jan's holding it up. And I have a few prepared questions for you all today. And from what I understand, you also have a few prepared answers. But if time allows, we'll leave room for spirit to move, and perhaps you could chime in. Our first question today will be answered by Mel initially, is why is history so important? And is there a particular one here at Fourth Universalist that you would like to highlight this morning?
I thought a lot about this, and the reason history is so important is that we make it. The presence of this church, the wonderful music, the history of the music. But I do want to tell one story, and it happened just last week when we were up in the study talking about all the staff changes and all the worries and what's going to happen. And the story comes from Liz Wolfe, who said, wait, everybody, and we were worried about getting a new DRE. How were we going to do that? And there's another congregation that has more money than we do, I think, and they also need a DRE in the city. And they're having a hard time, and she stopped us, and she said, wait, we're in a challenging time, but you can't confuse challenging with scarcity. We have something to do. Years ago, when we were also facing a challenging time, I took a hiatus from this congregation. I wasn't here at that moment, but there was a question about selling the building. And she said, you know, in a scarcity mentality, you might be willing to sell the building. But her opinion, and I agree, is that we don't sell what we can't replace. And lo and behold, we found a search committee for finding a new DRE. We're making history.
Thank you, Melanie, for the reminder that there are lots to learn from history and that history is still alive today. So thanks for making that connection. Anyone else from the panel would like to chime in with that question? All right, then we'll move on to the next one, which is how did you find meaningful activities or a vocation after retirement? We'll have John get us started on that.
Well, for many people, work has been an important part of defining them. Often they will ask an older person, "What do you do?" And if the older person simply says they are retired, that doesn't tell you very much about them. You need to know more. Indeed, the retired person will often struggle with what that more is. Most older people want to do something meaningful once retired, but the more can mean a lot of different things, such as intellectually stimulating, creating social value through work and volunteering, maintaining social contacts, having fun, and all of the above. So what did I do when I got to retirement age? Well, I kept on working. That's what I did. I retired from one large international bank, and then I went to another one. And a few years later, I retired from that, and then I went to work back to the large accounting firm where I had been a partner. And people I had mentored asked me to come back and work, so I went back, and then I retired from that. And at the age 70, following, I'm older than that, I'm 81 at this point. At that point, I began volunteering for different things. I became the treasurer of the Star Island Corporation, which is a retreat center for Unitarians and Congregationalists. I went back to school and actually got a master's degree in global development policy. I started working part-time in that area, largely on a pro bono basis, but some for compensation as well. And then I became the director of tax and fiscal reform. My occupation's always been international tax and finance. For a small UK charity that provided pro bono legal services to developing countries around the world. My wife, strangely, aged at the same pace as I did. And she's sitting here. In any event, she took up painting, created a book group, and volunteered to be a member of our town's historic committee. At 81, I retired once again from the different things I've done, and I'm thinking about and taking up writing a book about invective in presidential elections and how that affected the outcome of those elections. So this is my story, but every older person has their own story, and some are very, very interesting.
Thank you, John. And so I guess it would be fair to say that you failed at retirement initially, but are now finding your way to let things go a little bit more, right?
Indeed.
Anyone else from the panel would like to share about Jim?
Well, I was a professor. I'm still a professor. And people in academia often are very happy with our situation because even after you officially retire, you can go right on doing what you did before. You know, writing, researching, lecturing, not to a class that you have to grade every day, but you know, most of us were happy to retire because we had this list of things, and they never got done because of teaching, and now they can get done.
All right, thank you.
Well, people often ask me what I like about retirement. I retired when I was 63, I'm now 77, and my response is always, I no longer have to smile at people I hate or dislike. Okay, let's put it that way.
Yeah, my line is, my Social Security check comes whether you like me or not.
Catherine.
I just realized as I was sitting here listening to you, John, that the best jobs that I had came solely by accident.
Wow. All right, our next question I have been looking forward to for a little over a month now. And this is the question of, there's a misconception that sexuality comes to a screeching halt after one hits a certain age. Would you mind shedding some light on some of the issues that older adults deal with? And by the way, as an aside, the Unitarian Universalist Association, in collaboration with the United Church of Christ, has come up with a human sexuality curriculum back in the early 2000s called Our Whole Lives. And up until recently, that has been a curriculum that we teach our kids up until they reach high school. And recently, they came up with a version for seniors, right? So senior OWL, as well as a young adults OWL. So I invite you to check out that curriculum. But for this particular question, I'd like to ask Arnie, with permission from his spouse, Amy, right?
Definitely. Okay, so, well, aging clearly brings life transitions that can affect sexuality and intimacy in older adults. How we feel physically impacts on what we're able to do, with some accepting with grace the changes associated with aging, and others yearning for, quote, the way it was, unquote. There is no doubt that normal aging can interfere with our ability to enjoy sex. As we age, our bodies do undergo changes, which can result in our feeling less comfortable with our bodies. There's also a real fear that our partner will find us less attractive. And of course, health conditions can and often do impinge on achieving a fulfilling sex life. It is a scientific fact that sex organs change with age. The vagina may not naturally lubricate itself, and erectile dysfunction can become an issue when men cannot remain erect enough for penetration. Menopause in women may also affect sexuality, with a resulting increase or decreasing urge to engage in sexual activity. As we age, medicine, surgeries, and other disabilities can affect one's ability to have and enjoy sex. These can include too much alcohol, which can cause erection problems in men and delayed orgasm in women. Arthritis, which can make sexual contact uncomfortable. Chronic pain medicines, which can negatively affect sexual function. Dementia, which may result in inappropriate sexual behavior. Depression, which can lower sexual interest. Heart disease, which can result in being afraid to be sexually active. Medication side effects that may include the lessening of sexual desire, and is especially true for individuals taking numerous medications, which is often the case for older adults. Obesity can negatively affect on sexuality, and surgeries such as hysterectomy, a mastectomy, prostate surgery can negatively affect sexual behavior, and of course the lack of a sexual partner as one experiences partner and peer loss. It is important that sexual concerns be discussed with one's physician, although too often doctors are reluctant to discuss sexual issues with their patients. One should become proactive and not be afraid to discuss concerns with one's PCP. Take the initiative. Also, sexual comparisons with one's peers is not necessarily helpful, as people have different sexual appetites and needs, and what's right for one individual may not be right for the next person. Needless to say, safe sex should always be practiced, as older people, like younger people, need protection from STDs, even if the use of a condom can decrease sensitivity. Finally, older members of the gay, lesbian, and bisexual communities may feel less open about discussing sexual issues for fear of being discriminated against and misunderstood, as they were when society was less open and individuals remained in the closet. Likewise for members of the transgender community. In conclusion, being sexual is about more than just having intercourse. Cuddling, massage, touching, mutual masturbation, hugging, perhaps even watching porn, as well as open communication, can lead to greater closeness as couples, both straight and same-sex, explore new ways to be intimate with each other.
Wow, that was very extensive. Thank you, Arnie.
I did a lot of research.
Spoken like a true psychologist. And isn't it great that we here at this congregation could talk about sexuality so openly? In fact, when I was at my last congregation, the most well-received sermon I ever gave was on senior sex, a topic I knew nothing about, but I did some research on in terms of asking members of the congregation. So anybody else want to comment on that? How do our relationship change over time, and how do we define intimacy as we grow older?
Well, my husband, Steve, who died last year, was a case of exactly what you're talking about. Too many medications, too many illnesses, it just gets harder. But, we kind of developed this thing in the last couple of years of getting to bed at night, and I would say to him, "Do you want a spoon?" And, we kind of nestled together like spoons, and it felt really nice, and it didn't have to go anywhere other than that, because it was ultimately about just being close and being affectionate. And I think that becomes, well, it's always important for everybody, but more so at the end.
Thank you, Jim. We have two more questions, and one of them is, what words of wisdom would you like to share about grief and mortality? What are some spiritual practices that you employ, Catherine?
My grandfather had been living with us, with my family, when he died. I was 8. He had learned to knit at a school in England where he was born. When he lived with us, he knit baby booties by the gross that a local Buffalo department store sold for him. He taught me to say the alphabet backwards, which I can still do. Is he dead? No, Papa lives in me. But our family mourned him, especially my mother, for a long time. Freud wrote that the work of mourning does take a long time. Its progress is marked and made by remembering the shared experiences, the birthday, the first date, the illness, the vacation together. The first time you realize that last year, on this date, when we did this, the person was alive, and now she is gone. That's a gut punch. Every year, many anniversaries will rise up, but only once is each memory the first time without the person. And this memory is very slowly internalized. For most, the second and ongoing anniversaries get a little easier. After a while, all those memories of the person are alive inside you, and you stop mourning. It is said that we are the sum of all the people we have loved and lost. Last year, I turned 80, and I realized that I might die in this decade, or if not, then I am really now acknowledging that I will die. Does it help to feel accompanied by all those I loved and lost? That those who love me will carry me with them after I am gone? This past fall, when I went to Japan, I took an ikebana, that's a Japanese flower arranging technique, an ikebana lesson with my mother, who died 20 years ago. She had become a master in that art, but had never gotten to go to Japan. Closer to home, I love our new ritual here at Fourth U that we've adopted, lighting candles on Sunday for those in our hearts. Maybe it's partly because I know some people somewhere will light a candle for me.
Thank you, Catherine. So much more to explore around grief and the dying process. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but Jim, you could perhaps end us and shed some more light on your theology of death and dying.
I didn't think much about death until my 60s, when we inevitably start to experience firsthand the fragility of our bodies and the increasing number of loved ones disappearing. As for what happens after their funerals, like many UUs, I've never seen evidence of a soul or afterlife. That lack of faith makes approaching life's end less anxious, I think, than for self-described God-fearing believers. Even so, my golden years are still sad. True, having worked for decades to achieve my goals, I can shed the burdens of responsibility, but that relief is undercut by the stark fact that there won't be many more tasks or experiences of any kind. For one thing, as Arnie mentioned, we worry about prolonged illness and memory loss. I actively support widening the opportunities for medical aid in dying because laws against it presume that my life is some divinity's to dispose of rather than my own. Faced with that shrinking horizon, older humanists may undergo a kind of secular version of the deathbed confessional, a retrospective self-examination about what we did in this life or didn't do. I think a lot about my bucket list, the long dreamed of things you still want to be or see or do or atone for before you kick the bucket. Some people's items may involve travel or adventure, others may be creative or spiritual. In my case, it's writing projects and supporting Fourth U. At 76, I only have two major items left. I'm writing a history of my family as a gift to the next generation, and a memoir of early LGBTQ culture and activism. So my anxiety in the face of death is not, where will I go later, but rather, will I be granted enough quality time here? In humanist theology, salvation is being able to leave the world with no regrets for anything left undone or unredeemed. And to me, that's a kind of psychological equivalent of absolution from sin.
Thank you, Jim. Why don't we take an opportunity to once again thank our panelists for sharing their insights and wisdom with us this morning. And I'm certainly hoping that this will become an annual event moving forward. Thank you all.